And they walk in, these men, and they quiz the kids. And he also says the teacher was on edge because the testing reflected how well the teaching had done, how well the teacher had done his job. And at the end of the day, the school committee huddled, and then they said, good job, you passed, this is a good school, and they were all relieved that they had passed examination day. A couple of other things in the factory records. They mentioned there was an evening school in Waltham, and that was run for the mill girls. I don't know, I haven't found anything else on it. They just said in the first 2 years we had an evening school here. And another really interesting thing, the first year that they opened the school on Elm Street, they ran they called it a Sunday school. And they ran it for 1 year. Samuel Slater down in Rhode Island was running a Sunday school too. He himself taught it, and he taught religion, and he stressed the importance of obedience, that you obey God and you obey your bosses. And in Waltham, they ran a Sunday school for 1 year, and then it's no longer mentioned. I found no other mention, but they had a Sunday school teacher for 1 year in Waltham, and then the corporation ended that. Other things the Boston Manufacturing Company did, they set up a library. Waltham's first public library was established by Boston Manufacturing Company. It was, in 1821, they appropriated $500, and they put the local reverend, the Reverend Sewell Harding was his name, and they said, you're in charge of picking out the books. So, $500, a substantial amount of money, and they established a library called the Manufacturers Library. In 1826, if you know where Waltham City Hall is, right at the corner, they built a building that stood until 1926. It was called Rumford Hall. Built by Boston Manufacturing Company, and upstairs they opened up a lecture hall. The lecture hall was called the Rumford Institute for Mutual Instruction. Every Saturday night they had a program like this. They brought in authors, they brought in scientists, they brought in philosophers, they brought in all kinds of Horace Mann, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Governor Edward Everett, Mark Twain spoke there. And they'd bring in speakers who would speak to the girls. One of the interesting things, they brought in Ralph Waldo Emerson. The first time he came, before he was famous, he charged $3 and feed for his horse. And a few years later, he was getting $20 for a lecture. And the same year that he got $20, Edward Everett, who was the governor of Massachusetts and became president of Harvard, got $100. Now, who remembers Edward Everett today, and who remembers Ralph Waldo Emerson? But Emerson wasn't the big draw at the time. In the Boston Manufacturing Company, they built the hall, they sponsored the lectures, they allowed the institute to use the hall for $60 a year in rent. All of the money was used to purchase books. And eventually that was sold to the town of Waltham, and it became Waltham's Town Hall right up until 1926. So they established schools, they established a lecture hall, they established the Waltham Public Library. And I think the question is, why? What motivated them? And some authors who have acknowledged these contributions, they say what motivated them was self-interest. That what they were trying to do was make their factory a place that would attract workers. And I don't think it's true. In fact, I'm sure it's not true. The Boston Associates, who began the Boston Manufacturing Company, and the three major names there, Francis Cabot Lowell, Nathan Appleton, Patrick Tracy Jackson, all of them grew up in the late 1700s. And that was a period of the early republic, and it was a period of patriotism. And there was a real question when America began, and James Madison wrote about this in the Federalist Papers, can the country survive? No republic had ever existed in the history of the world other than a city-state. So can a republic exist in a continent? And if you look at all of the founding fathers, they all talk about the importance of education. You have to have an educated citizenry, because otherwise you'll have selfish citizens. That Mr. Goodman, the head of the history department, we talk about this sometimes, that what's the importance of history and social studies today? We're preparing kids for citizenship. And I look at these men who began the Boston Manufacturing Company, and they grew up at a time when that would have been part of their upbringing, that education is necessary in order to have good citizens. So I think one of the real reasons that they established the schools in Waltham was the whole idea of civic virtue, that we have to train children for citizenship. I think a second reason, and I think this is neglected sometime, all of these men are patriots. They're patriots in regard to the U.S., and they also love New England. I look at what Appleton wrote and what Lowell wrote and what Jackson wrote. The love for New England and the love for home, it really comes through in what they write. So one of the reasons I think they established the schools and these other things in Waltham, they're trying to do the right thing. This is their home. This is a place they believe in. And I think the third reason, and that they have to be given credit for, they were incredibly generous. The Mass General Hospital was begun by the Boston Associates. Boston Athenaeum, begun by the Boston Associates. Mass Historical Society, begun by the Boston Associates. They give all kinds of money to Harvard. Even at the Boston Manufacturing Company, one of the things I found in the company record, there was a fire there. And it was just a small fire, and a few of the workers put it out. And in the company records, the owners of the mill recommended that the people who put it out each be given, it's either $10 or $20, be given a bonus of, they were just on the job and they put it out, but it was either $10 or $20 a piece. That's an enormous sum of money back then. So I think we're looking at generous men who were patriots, who had a real civic vision of what they wanted to accomplish in Waltham. Now, one of the questions comes up is this. Every account I've looked at of the Boston Associates in Waltham, I have not found a single negative word said about them. So you can go to the Waltham News Tribune, you can go to the Waltham Sentinel, you can go to any local author, everyone is positive towards the mill. There's zero criticism, there's none, even into the 20th century. The same men, now Francis Cabot Lowell dies in 1817, so not him, they established mills in Lowell, Lawrence, Chicopee, Manchester, all over New England. They go to those places and they're criticized. So what was different? Why are these men idealized in Waltham and criticized elsewhere? And it's one of the things in my work that I've tried to get across. I think some of it is the management. In Waltham, Francis Cabot Lowell, he was called the informing soul of the company. He's alive for 1814, 1815, 1816. In 1817, at the age of 42, he's dead of pneumonia. So he's only here at the beginning, but his brother-in-law, Patrick Tracy Jackson, manages the plant right up until 1827. He lived in the Waltham Common. I imagine he would have wanted to carry out his brother-in-law's wishes. After he leaves, a local man is appointed the head of the Boston Manufacturing Company. His name is Dr. Ebenezer Hobbs. And I imagine Hobbs Brook Basin, I imagine all of that is named after him, but I'm not 100% sure. He was a medical doctor. He attended Harvard. The workers loved him. At the same time in Lowell, there was a man named Kirk Boot, who was an authoritarian, a tough manager. He was called the master spirit of early Lowell. He had his hand in everything. He was heavy-handed. He's the manager up in Lowell, and you've got this benevolent Dr. Hobbs in Waltham. So I think one of the reasons for the difference between Waltham and Lowell, it might be the management of the companies.